The boy began to read his book again, but he was no longer able to concentrate. He was tense and upset because he knew that the old man was right. He went over to the bakery and bought a loaf of bread, thinking about whether or not he should tell the baker what the old man had said about him. Sometimes it's better to leave things as they are, he thought to himself. If he were to say anything, the baker would spend 3 days thinking about giving it all up, even though he'd gotten used to the way things were. The boy could certainly resist causing that kind of anxiety for the baker. So he began to wander through the city and found himself at the gate. There was a small building there with a window at which people bought tickets to Africa. And he knew that Egypt was in Africa. "Can I help you?" the man behind the counter asked. "Maybe tomorrow," said the boy, moving away. If he sold just one of his sheep, he'd have enough to get to the other shore of the strait. The idea frightened him. "Another dreamer," said the ticket seller to his assistant, watching the boy walk away. "He doesn't have enough money to travel." While standing at the ticket window, the boy had remembered his flock and decided he should go back to being a shepherd. In 2 years, he had learned everything about shepherding. He knew how to shear sheep, how to care for pregnant ewes, how to protect sheep from wolves. He knew all the fields and pastures of Andalusia. And he knew what was a fair price for every one of his animals. He decided to return to his friend's stable by the longest route possible. As he walked past the city's castle, he interrupted his turn and climbed the stone ramp that led to the top of the wall. From there, he could see Africa in the distance. Someone had once told him that it was from there that the Moors had come to occupy all of Spain. He could see almost the entire city from where he sat, including the plaza where he had talked with the old man. Curse the moment I met that old man, he thought. He had come to town only to find a woman who could interpret his dreams. Neither the woman nor the old man was at all impressed by the fact that he was a shepherd. They were solitary individuals who no longer believed in things. They didn't understand that shepherds become attached to their sheep. He knew everything about each member of his flock. He knew each one. He knew which ones were lame, which one was about to give birth 2 months from now, and which were the laziest. He knew how to shear them, how to slaughter them. If he ever decided to leave them, they would suffer. The wind began to pick up. He knew that wind. People called it the Levanter, because on it the Moors had come from Levant, at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. Levanter increased the intensity. Here I am, between my flock and my treasure, the boy thought. He had to choose between something he had become accustomed to and something he wanted to have. There was also the merchant's daughter, but she wasn't as important as his flock because she didn't depend on him. Maybe she didn't even remember him. He was sure that it made no difference to her on which day he appeared. For her, every day was the same. And when each day is the same as the next, it's because people fail to recognize the good things that happen in their lives every day that the sun rises. I left my father, my mother, the town castle behind. They have gotten used to my being away, and so have I. The sheep will get used to me not being here, too, the boy thought. From where he sat, he could observe the plaza. People continued to go and come from the baker's shop. A young couple sat on the bench where he had talked with the old man, and they kissed. That baker, he said to himself, without completing a thought. The Levanter was getting stronger, and he felt its force on his face. That wind had brought the moors, yes, but it had also brought the smell of desert, and of veiled women. It had brought with it the sweat and dreams of men who had once left to search for the unknown, and for gold and adventure, and for the pyramids. These people speak. The boy felt jealous of the freedom of the wind, and saw that he could have the same freedom. There was nothing to hold him back except for himself. The sheep, the merchant's daughter, and the fields of Andalusia were only steps along the way to his personal legend. The next day the boy met the old man at noon. He brought 6 sheep with him. "I'm surprised," the boy said. "My friend bought all the other sheep immediately. He said that he had always dreamed of being a shepherd, and that it was a good omen." "That's the way it always is," said the old man. "It's called the principle of favorability. When you play cards the first time, you're almost sure to win. Beginner's luck." "Why is that?" "Because there's a force that wants you to realize your personal legend. When it whets your appetite with a taste of success." The old man began to inspect the sheep, and he saw that one was lame. The boy explained it wasn't important, since the sheep was the most intelligent of the flock and produced the most wool. "Where's the treasure?" he asked. "It's in Egypt, near the pyramids." The boy was startled. The old woman had said the same thing, but she hadn't charged him anything. "In order to find the treasure, you will have to follow the omens. God has prepared a path for everyone to follow. You just have to read the omens that he has left for you." Before the boy could reply, a butterfly appeared and fluttered between him and the old man. He remembered something his grandfather had once told him, that butterflies are a good omen. Like crickets and like grasshoppers, like lizards and 4-leaf clovers. "That's right," said the old man, able to read the boy's thought. "Just as your grandfather taught you, these are good omens." The old man opened his cape, and the boy was struck by what he saw. The old man wore a breastplate of heavy gold covered with precious stones. The boy recalled the brilliance he had noticed on the previous day. He really was a king. He must be disguised to avoid encounters with thieves. "Take these," said the old man, holding out a white stone and a black stone that had been embedded in the center of his breastplate. "They are called Urim and Thummim. The black signifies yes, and the no, white. It's white. I said that backwards. When you are unable to read the omens, they will help you to do so. Always ask an objective question. But if you can, try to make your own decisions. The treasure is at the pyramids. That you already know. But I had to insist on the payment of 6 sheep because I helped you make your decision." The boy put the stones in his pouch. From then on, he would make his own decisions. "Don't forget that everything you deal with is only one thing and nothing else. And don't forget the language of the omens. And above all, don't forget to follow your personal legend through to its conclusion." But before I go, I want to tell you a little story. A certain shopkeeper sent his son to learn about the secrets of happiness from the wisest man in the world. The lad wandered through the desert for 40 days and finally came upon a beautiful castle, high atop the mountain. It was there that the old man lived, the wise man lived. Rather than find a saintly man, though, our hero on entering the main room of the castle, saw a hive of activity. Tradesmen came and went. People were conversing in the corners. A small orchestra was playing soft music, and there was a table covered with platters of the most delicious food from that part of the world. The wise man conversed with everyone, and the boy had to wait for 2 hours before it was his turn to be given the man's attention. The wise man listened attentively to the boy's explanation of why he had come, but told him that he didn't have time just then to explain the secret of happiness. He suggested that the boy look around the palace and return in 2 hours. "Meanwhile, I want to ask you to do something," said the wise man, handing the boy a teaspoon that held 2 drops of oil. "As you wander around, carry the spoon with you without allowing the oil to spill." The boy began climbing and descending the many stairways of the palace, keeping his eyes fixed on the spoon. After 2 hours, he returned to the room where the wise man was. "Well," asked the wise man, "did you see the Persian tapestries that are hanging in my dining hall? Did you see the garden that it took the master's gardeners 10 years to create? Did you notice the beautiful parchments in my library?" The boy was embarrassed and confessed he hadn't observed anything. His only concern had been not to spill the oil that the wise man had entrusted to him. "Then go back and observe the marvels of my world," the wise man said. "You cannot trust a man if you don't know his house." Relieved, the boy picked up the spoon and returned to his exploration of the palace, this time observing all of the works of art on the ceiling and the walls. He saw the gardens, the mountains all around him, the beauty of flowers, and the taste with which everything had been selected. Upon returning to the wise man, he related in detail everything he had seen. "But where are the drops of oil I entrusted you?" asked the wise old man. Looking down at the spoon he had held, the boy saw that oil was gone. "Well, there is only one piece of advice I can give you," said the wisest of wise men. "The secret of happiness is to see all the marvels of the world and never forget the drops of oil on the spoon." The shepherd said nothing. He had understood the story the old king had told him. A shepherd may like to travel, but he should never forget about his sheep. The old man looked at the boy and, with his hands held together, made several strange gestures over the boy's head. Then, taking his sheep, he walked away. At the highest point in Tarifa, there is an old fort built by the Moors. From atop its walls, one can catch glimpses of Africa. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, sat on the wall of the fort that afternoon and felt the levanter blowing on his face. The sheep fidgeted nearby, uneasy with their new owner and excited by so much change. All they wanted was food and water. Melchizedek watched a small ship that was plowing its way out of the port. He would never again see the boy, just as he had never seen Abraham again after having charged him his 1/10 fee. That was his work. The gods should not have desires because they don't have personal legends. But the king of Salem hoped desperately that the boy would be successful. "It's too bad that he's quickly going to forget my name," he thought. "I should have repeated it for him. Then when he spoke about me, he would say that I am Melchizedek, I don't know how to say it, the king of Salem." He looked to the skies, feeling a bit abashed, and said, "I know it's the vanities of vanities, as you said, my lord, But an old king sometimes has to make some pride in himself. How strange Africa is, thought the boy. He was sitting in a bar very much like the other bars he had seen along the narrow streets of Tangier. Some men were smoking from gigantic pipes that they passed from one to another. In just a few hours, he had seen men walking hand in hand, women with their faces covered, priests that climbed to the tops of towers and chanted. As everyone about him went to their knees and placed their foreheads to the ground. A practice of infidels, he said to himself. As a child in church, he'd always looked at this image of Saint Santiago Matamoros on his white horse, his sword unsheathed, and figures such as these kneeling at his feet. The boy felt ill and terribly alone. The infidels had an evil look about them. Besides this, in the rush of his travels, he had forgotten a detail, just one detail, which could keep him from his treasure for a long time. Only Arabic was spoken in this country. The owner of the bar approached him, and the boy pointed to a drink that had been served at the next table. It turned out to be a bitter tea. The boy preferred wine. But he didn't need to worry about that right now. What he had to be concerned with was about his treasure, and how he was going to go about getting it. The sale of his sheep had left him with enough money in his pouch, and the boy knew that in money there was magic. And the boy, whoever has money is never really alone. Interesting thought. Before long, maybe in just a few days, he would be at the pyramids. An old man with a breastplate of gold wouldn't have lied just to acquire 6 sheep. The old man had spoken about signs and omens, and as the boy was crossing the strait, he had thought about omens. Yes, the old man had known what he was talking about. During the time the boy had spent in the fields of Adulazia, he had become used to learning which path he should take by observing the ground and the sky. He had discovered that the presence of a certain bird meant that a snake was nearby, and that a certain shrub was a sign that there was water in the area. The sheep had taught him that. If God leads sheep so well, he will also lead a man, he thought, and that made him feel better. The tea seemed less bitter. "Who are you?" he heard a voice ask him in Spanish. The boy was relieved. He was thinking about omens, and someone had appeared. "How come you speak Spanish?" he asked. The new arrival was a young man in Western dress, but the color of his skin suggested he was from this city. He was about the same age and height as the boy. "Almost everyone speaks Spanish. We're only 2 hours from Spain." "Sit down and let me treat you to something," said the boy, "and ask for a glass of wine for me. I hate this tea." "There is no wine in this country," the young man said. "Religion here forbids it." The boy told him then that he needed to get to the pyramids. He almost began to tell about his treasure, but decided not to do so. If he did, it was possible the Arab would want part of it as payment for taking him there. He remembered what the old man had said about offering something you didn't have yet. "I'd like you to take me there if you can. I can pay you to serve as my guide." "Do you have any idea how to get there?" the newcomer asked. The boy noticed that the owner of the bar stood nearby, listening attentively to his conversation. He felt uneasy in the man's presence, but he had found a guide and he didn't want to miss out on an opportunity. "You have to cross the entire Sahara Desert," said the young man, "and to do that you need money. I need to know that whether or not you have enough." The boy thought it was a strange question, but he trusted in the old man, who had said that when you really want something, the universe always conspires in your favor. He took the money from its pouch and showed it to the young man. The owner of the bar came and looked as well. The two men exchanged some words in Arabic, and the bar owner seemed less irritated. "Let's get out of here," said the new arrival. "He wants us to leave." The boy was relieved. He got up to pay the bill, but the owner grabbed him and began to speak to him in stream of words. The boy was strong and wanted to retaliate, but he was in a foreign country. His new friends pushed the owner aside and pulled the boy outside. He wanted your money, he said. "Tangier is not like the rest of Africa. This is a port, and every port has thieves." The boy trusted his new friend. He had helped him out of a dangerous situation, and he took out his money and counted it. "We could get to the pyramids by tomorrow," the other said, taking the money, "but I have to buy 2 camels." They walked together through the narrow streets of Tangier. Everywhere there were stalls with items for sale. They reached the center of a large plaza where the market was held. There were thousands of people there, arguing, selling, and buying, vegetables for sale amongst the daggers, and carpets displayed along tobacco. But the boy never took his eye off his new friend. After all, he had all his money. He thought about asking him to give it back, but decided that it would be unfriendly. He knew nothing about the customs of the strange land he was in. "I'll just watch him," he said to himself. He knew he was stronger than his friend. Suddenly, there in the midst of all that confusion, he saw the most beautiful sword he has ever seen. The scarab was embossed in silver, and the handle was black and encrusted with precious stones. The boy promised himself that, when he returned from Egypt, he would buy that sword. "Ask the owner of that stall how much that sword costs," he said to his friend. Then he realized that he had been distracted for a few moments, looking at the sword. His heart squeezed as if his chest had suddenly compressed. He was afraid to look around because he knew what he would find. He continued to look at the beautiful sword for a little longer until he summoned the courage to turn around. All around him was the market, the people coming and going, shouting and buying, and the aroma of strange foods. But nowhere was his new companion. The boy wanted to believe that his friend had simply become separated from him by accident. He decided to stay right there and wait his return. As he waited, a priest climbed to the top of the nearby tower and began to chant. Everyone in the market fell to their knees and touched their foreheads to the ground and took up the chant. Then, like a colony of worker ants, they dismantled their stalls and left. The sun began its departure as well. The boy watched it through its trajectory for some time, until it was hidden behind a white house surrounding the plaza. The white houses surrounding the plaza. He recalled that when the sun had risen that morning, he was on another continent, still a shepherd with 60 sheep, and looking forward to meeting with a girl. That morning he had known everything that was going to happen to him as he walked through the familiar fields. But now, as the sun began to set, he was in a different country, a stranger in a strange land where he couldn't even speak the language. He was no longer a shepherd, not even the money to return and to start everything over. All this happened between sunrise and sunset, the boy thought. He was feeling sorry for himself and lamenting the fact that his life could have changed so suddenly and so drastically. He was so ashamed that he wanted to cry. Been there. He had never even wept in front of his own sheep, but the marketplace was empty and he was far from home, so he wept. He wept because God was unfair, and because this was the way God repaid those who believed in their dreams. When I had my sheep, I was happy, and I made those around me happy. People saw me coming and welcomed me, he thought, but now I am sad and alone. I'm going to become bitter and distrustful of people because one person betrayed me. I'm going to hate those who have found their treasure because I never found mine, and I am going to hold on to what little I have because I am too insignificant to conquer the world. He opened his pouch to see what was left of his possessions. Maybe there was a bit left of the sandwich he had eaten on the ship. But all he found was the heavy book, his jacket, and 2 stones the old man had given him. As he looked at the stones, he felt relieved for some reason. He had exchanged 6 sheep for 2 precious stones that had been taken from a gold breastplate. He could sell the stones and buy a return ticket. But this time I'll be smarter, the boy thought, removing them from the pouch so he could put them in his pocket. This was a port town, and the only truthful thing his friend had told him was that port towns are full of thieves. Now he understood why the owner of the bar had been so upset. He was trying to tell him not to trust that man. I'm like everyone else. I see the world in terms of what I'd like to see happen, not like it actually does. He ran his fingers slowly over the stones, sensing their temperature and feeling their surfaces. They were his treasures. Just handling them made him feel better. They reminded him of the old man. When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it, he had said. The boy was trying to understand the truth of what the old man had said. There he was in the empty marketplace without a cent to his name and with not a sheep to guard throughout the night. But the stones were proof that he had met with a king who knew the boy's past. They're called Urim and Thummim, and they can help you read the omens. The boy put the stones back in the pouch and decided to do an experiment. The old man had said to ask very clear questions, and to do that, the boy had to know what he wanted. So, he asked if the old man's blessing was still with him, and he took one of the stones. It was yes. Am I going to find my treasure? He asked. He stuck his hand into the pouch and felt for one of the stones. As he did so, both of them pushed through the hole in the pouch and fell to the ground. The boy had never even noticed there was a hole in his pouch. He knelt down to find the Urim and Thummim and put them back in the pouch. But as he saw them lying there on the ground, another phrase came to his mind. Learn to recognize omens and follow them, the old king had said. An omen. The boy smiled to himself. He picked up the 2 stones and put them back in the pouch. He didn't consider mending the hole. The stones could fall through any time they wanted. He had learned that there were certain things one shouldn't ask about, so as not to flee from one's own personal journey. I promised that I would make my own decisions, he said to himself. But the stones had told him that the old man was still with him, and that he made him feel confident. And that made him feel confident. I can read. He looked around at the empty plaza again, feeling less desperate than before. This wasn't a strange place. It was a new one. After all, what he had always wanted was just that, to know new places. Even if he never got to the pyramids, he had already traveled farther than any shepherd he knew. Oh, if they only knew how different things are just 2 hours by ship from where they are, he thought. Although his new world at the moment was just an empty marketplace, he had already seen it when it was teeming with life. He would never forget it. He remembered the sword. It hurt him a bit to think about it, but he had never seen one like it before. As he mused about these things, he realized he had to choose between thinking of himself as a poor victim of a thief and as an adventurer on a quest of his treasure. I'm an adventurer looking for a treasure, he said to himself. He was shaken into wakefulness by someone. He had fallen asleep in the middle of the marketplace. I have to pause it. I'm going to start that again. He was shaken into wakefulness by someone. He had fallen asleep in the middle of the marketplace, and life on the plaza was about to resume. Looking around, he sought his sheep, and then realized that he was in a world. But instead of being saddened, he was happy. He no longer had to seek out food and water for the sheep. He could go in search of treasure for himself instead. He had not a cent in his pocket, but he had faith. He had decided the night before that he would be as much an adventurer as the ones he admired in his books. He walked slowly through the market. The merchants were assembling their stalls, and the boy helped a candy seller to do his. The candy seller had a smile on his face. He was happy, aware of his life, what his life was about, and ready to begin a day's work. His smile reminded the boy of the old man, the mysterious old king he had met. This candy merchant isn't making candy so that later he can travel or marry a shopkeeper's daughter. He's doing it because it's what he wants to do, the boy thought. He realized that he could do the same thing the old man had done, sense whether a person was near or far from his personal legend. Just by looking at them, it's easy, and yet I'd never done it before, he thought. When the stall was assembled, the candy seller offered the boy the first sweet he had made for the day, and the boy thanked him and ate it and went on his way. When he had gone only a short distance, he realized that while they were erecting the stall, one of them had spoken Arabic and the other Spanish. They had understood each other perfectly well. There must be a language that doesn't depend on words, the boy thought. I've already had that experience with my sheep, and now it's happening with people. He was learning a lot of new things. Some of them were things that he'd already experienced and weren't really new, but they had never perceived before. And he hadn't perceived them because he had become accustomed to them, he realized. If I can learn to understand this language without words, I can learn to understand the world. Relaxed and unhurried, he resolved that he would walk through the narrow streets of Tangier. Only in that way would he be able to read the omens. He knew it would require a lot of patience, but shepherds know all about patience. Once again, he saw that, in that strange land, he was applying the same lessons he had learned with his sheep. All things are one. the old man had said. The crystal merchant awoke with the day and felt the same anxiety he felt every morning. He had been in the same place for 30 years, a shop at the top of a hilly street where few customers passed. Now it was too late to change anything. The only thing he had ever learned to do was to buy and sell crystal glassware. There had been a time when many people knew of his shop. Arab merchants, French and English geologists, German soldiers who were always well-heeled. In those days, it had been wonderful to be selling crystal, and he had thought he would become rich and have beautiful women at his side as he grew older. But, as time passed, Tangier had changed. The nearby city of Quetta had grown faster than Tangier, and business had fallen off. Neighbors moved away, and there remained only a few small shops on the hill. And no one was going to climb the hill just to browse through a few small shops. But the crystal merchant had no choice. He had lived 30 years of his life buying and selling crystal pieces, and now it was too late to do anything else. He spent the entire morning observing the infrequent comings and goings in the street. He had done this for years and knew the schedule of everyone who passed. But just before lunch, a boy stopped in front of the shop. He was dressed normally, but the practiced eyes of the crystal merchant could see the boy had no money to spend. Nevertheless, the merchant decided to delay his lunch for a few minutes until the boy moved on. A card changing in the doorway announced several languages were spoken in the shop. The boy saw a man appear behind the counter. "I can clean up those glasses in the window if you want," said the boy. "The way they look now, no one's going to want to buy them." The man looked at him without responding. "In exchange, you could give me something to eat." The man still said nothing, and the boy sensed that he was going to have to make a decision. In his pouch, he had his jacket, and he certainly wasn't going to need it in the desert. Yes, you are. Taking the jacket out, he began to clean the glass. In half an hour, he cleaned all the glasses in the window, and as he was doing so, 2 customers had entered the shop and bought some crystal. When he had completed the cleaning, he asked the man for something to eat. "Let's go and have some lunch," said the crystal merchant. He put the sign in the door, and they went to a small cafe nearby. As they sat down at the only table in the place, the crystal merchant laughed. "You didn't have to do any cleaning. The Quran requires me to feed hungry people." "Well then, why did you let me do it?" asked the boy. "Because the crystals were dirty, and both you and I needed to cleanse our minds of negative thoughts." Indeed. When they had eaten, the merchant turned to the boy and said, "I'd like you to work in my shop. 2 customers came in today while you were working, and that's a good omen." "People talk a lot about omens," thought the shepherd, "but they really don't know what they're saying. Just as I hadn't realized that for so many years I'd been speaking a language without words to my sheep." "Do you want to go work for me?" the merchant asked. "I can work for the rest of the day today," the boy answered. "I'll work all night until dawn, and I'll clean every piece of crystal in your shop. In return, I need money to get to Egypt tomorrow." The merchant laughed. "Even if you cleaned my crystals for an entire year, even if you earned a good commission selling every piece, you still have to borrow money to get to Egypt. There are thousands of kilometers of deserts between here and there." There was a moment of silence so profound, it seemed the city was asleep. No sound from the bazaars, no arguments among the merchants, no men climbing to the towers to chant. No hope, No adventure, no old kings or personal legends, no treasure, no pyramids. It was as if the world had fallen silent because of the boy's soul had. It was if the world had become silent because the boy's soul had. He sat there, staring blankly through the door of the cafe, wishing that he had died and that everything would end forever at that moment. The merchant looked anxiously at the boy. All of the joy he had seen that morning had suddenly disappeared. I can give you the money you need to get back to your country, my son, the crystal merchant said. The boy said nothing. He got up, adjusted his clothing, and picked up his pouch. I'll work for you. And after a long silence, he added, I need money to buy some sheep. Oops. Are we recording? Part 2. Try not to cry this time. The boy had been working for the crystal merchant for almost a month, and he could see it wasn't exactly the kind of job that would make him happy. The merchant spent the entire day mumbling behind the counter, telling the boy to be careful with the pieces and not to break anything. But he stayed with the job because of the merchant, although he was an old grouch, treated him fairly. The boy received a good commission for each of the pieces he sold and had already been able to put some money aside. That morning he had done some calculating. If he continued to work every day as he had been, he would need a whole year to buy some sheep. I'd like to build a display case for the crystal, the boy said to the merchant. We could place it outside and attract those people who pass at the bottom of the hill. I have never had one before, the merchant answered. People will pass by and bump into it, and the pieces will be broken. Well, when I took my sheep through the fields, some of them might have died if we had come upon a snake. But that's the way life is with sheep and with shepherds. The merchant turned to a customer who wanted 3 crystal glasses. He was selling better than ever, as if the time had turned back to the old days when the street had been one of Tangier's major attractions. Business has really improved, he said to the boy after the customer had left. I'm doing much better, and soon you'll be able to return to your sheep. Why ask more of life? Because we have to respond to omens, the boy said, almost without meaning to. Then he regretted what he had said because the merchant had never met the king. It's called the principle of favorability, the beginner's luck. Because life wants you to achieve your personal legend, the king had said. But the merchant understood what the boy had said. The boy's very presence in the shop was an omen, and as time passed and money was pouring into the cash drawer, he had no regrets about having hired the boy. The boy was being paid more money than he deserved because the merchant, thinking that sales wouldn't amount to much, had offered the boy a high commission rate. He had assumed he would soon return to his sheep. Why did you want to get to the pyramids? He asked, to get away from the business of the display. Because I have always heard about them, the boy answered, saying nothing about his dream. The treasure was now nothing but a painful memory, and he tried to avoid thinking about it. I don't know anyone around here who wants to cross the desert just to see the pyramids, said the merchant. They're just a pile of stones. You could build one in your backyard. You've never had dreams of travel, said the boy, turning to wait on a customer who had entered the shop. 2 days later, the merchant spoke to the boy about the display. I don't much like change, he said. You and I aren't like Hassan, that rich merchant. If he makes a buying mistake, it doesn't affect him much. But we too have our lives with our mistake. That's true enough, the boy thought ruefully. Why do you think we should have a display? I want to get back to my sheep faster. I have to take advantage when luck is on our side and do as much to help it as it's going to help us. It's called the principle of favorability, or beginner's luck. The merchant was silent for a few moments. Then he said, "The Prophet gave us the Quran and left us 5 obligations to satisfy our lives. The most important is to believe only in the one true God. The others are to pray 5 times a day and fast during Ramadan and be charitable to the poor." He stopped there, his eyes filled with tears as he spoke of the Prophet. He was a devout man, and even with all of his impatience, he wanted to live his life in accordance with Muslim law. "What's the 5th obligation?" the boy asked. 2 days ago, you said that I never dreamed of travel," the merchant answered. "The 5th obligation of every Muslim is a pilgrimage. We are obliged, at least once in our lives, to visit the holy city of Mecca. Mecca is a lot farther away than the pyramids. When I was young, all I wanted to do was put together enough money to start this shop. I thought that someday I'd be rich and could go to Mecca. I began to make some money, but I could never bring myself to leave someone in charge of the shop. The crystals are delicate things. At the same time, people were passing my shop all the time, heading for Mecca. Some of them were rich pilgrims traveling in caravans with servants and camels, but most of them were people making the pilgrimage, were poorer than I. And all who went there were happy at having done so. They placed the symbol of their pilgrimage on the doors of their houses. One of them, a cobbler who made his living mending boots, said that he had traveled for almost a year through the desert, but that he had got more tired when he had walked through the streets of Tangier buying his leather. "Well, why don't you go to Mecca now?" the boy asked. "Because it's the thought of Mecca that keeps me alive. It's what helps me face these days that are all the same. These mute crystals on shelves and lunch and dinner at the same horrible cafe. I'm afraid that if my dream is realized, I'll have no reason to go on living. You dream about your sheep and the pyramids, but you're different from me because you want to realize your dreams. I just want to dream about Mecca. I already imagined 1,000 times crossing the desert, arriving on that plaza of the sacred stone, the 7 times I walk around it before allowing myself to touch it. I've already imagined the people who would be at my side, and those in front of me, and the conversations and the prayers we would have. But I'm afraid that it would all be a disappointment, so I prefer to dream about it." That day, the merchant gave the boy permission to build the display. Not everyone can see his dreams come true in the same way. 2 more months passed, and the shelf brought many customers into the crystal shop. The boy estimated that if he worked for 6 more months, he could return to Spain, buy 60 sheep, and yet another 60. In less than a year, he would have doubled his flock. He would be able to do business with the Arabs because he would now be able to speak their strange language. Since that morning in the marketplace, he had never again made use of Urim and Thummim, because Egypt was now just a distant dream for him, as was Mecca for the merchant. Anyway, the boy had become happy in his work and thought all the time about the day when he would disembark at Tarifa as a winner. "You must always know what it is you want," the king had said. The boy knew and was now working hard at it. Maybe it was his treasure to have wound up in a strange land, met up with a thief, and doubled the size of his flock without spending a cent. He was proud of himself. He had learned some important things, like how to deal in crystal and about the language without words, about omens. One afternoon he had seen a man on top of the hill, complaining that it was impossible to find a decent place to get something to drink after such a climb. The boy, accustomed to recognizing omens, spoke to the merchant. "Let's sell tea to the people who climb the hill." "Lots of places sell tea around here," the merchant said. "But we could sell tea in crystal glasses, and the people enjoy tea and want to buy the glasses. I have been told that beauty is the great seducer of men." The merchant didn't respond, but that afternoon, after saying his prayers and closing the shop, he invited the boy to sit with him and share his hookah, that strange pipe used by Arabs. "What is it you're looking for?" asked the old merchant. "I've already told you. I need to buy my sheep back so I can earn the money. So I have to earn the money to do so." The merchant put some new coals on the hookah and inhaled deeply. "I've had this shop for 30 years. I know good crystal from bad and everything else there is to know about crystal. I know its dimensions, how it behaves. If we serve tea in crystal, the shop is going to expand, and then I'll have to change my way of life." "Well, isn't that good? I am already used to the way things are. Before you came, I was thinking about how much time I had wasted in the same place while my friends had moved on, either went bankrupt or did things that they had before, better things than they had before. It made me very depressed. Now I can see that it hasn't been too bad. The shop is exactly the size I've always wanted it to be. I don't want to change anything because I don't know how to deal with change. I am used to the way I am." The boy didn't know what to say. The man continued, "You have been a real blessing to me. Today, I understand something I didn't see before. Every blessing ignored becomes a curse. I don't want anything else in life. But you are forcing me to look at wealth and at horizons I have never known. Now that I have seen them, and now that I see how immense my possibilities are, I'm going to feel worse than I did before you arrived, because I know the things I should be able to accomplish, and I don't want to do so. It's good I refrained from saying anything to the baker and Tarifa, the boy thought to himself. They went on smoking the pipe for a while as the sun began to set. They were conversing in Arabic, and the boy was proud of himself for being able to do so. There had been a time when he thought that his sheep could teach him everything he needed to know about the world, but they could never teach him Arabic. "There are probably other things in the world that sheep can't teach me," thought the boy as he regarded the old merchant. "All they ever do, really, is look for food and water, and maybe that wasn't that they were trying to teach me, but I was learning for them." "Maktub," the merchant finally said. "What does that mean?" "You would have to be born Arab to understand, but in your language it would mean something like 'it is written.'" And so it is. And as he smothered the coals in the hookah, he told the boy that he could begin to sell tea in the crystal glasses. Sometimes there's just no way to hold back the river. Men climbed the hill, and they were tired when they reached the top. But there they saw a crystal shop that offered refreshing mint tea. They went in to drink tea, which was served in beautiful crystal glasses. "My wife never thought of this," said one, and he bought some crystal. He was entertaining guests that night, and the guests would be impressed by the beauty of the glassware. The other man remarked that the tea was always more delicious when it was served in crystal, because the aroma was retained. The third said that it was a tradition in the Orient to use crystal glasses for tea because it had magical powers. Before long, the news spread, and a great many people began to climb the hill to see the shop that was doing something new in a trade that was so old. Other shops were open that served tea and crystal, but they weren't at the top of the hill, and they had little business. Eventually, the merchant had to hire 2 more employees. He began to import enormous amounts of tea along with his crystal, and his shop was sought out by men and women with thirst for new things. And in that way, the months passed. The boy awoke before dawn. It had been 11 months and 9 days since he had first set foot on the African continent. Wow, 11 months and 9 days. He had dressed in his Arabian clothing of white linen, bought especially for this day. He put his headcloth in place and secured it with a ring made of camel skin. Wearing his new sandals, he descended the stairs silently. The city was still sleeping. He prepared himself a sandwich and drank some hot tea from a crystal glass. Then he sat in the sun-filled doorway, smoking the hookah. He smoked in silence, thinking of nothing, listening to the sound of the wind that brought the scent of the desert. When he had finished his smoke, he reached into one of his pockets and sat there for a few moments, regarding what he had withdrawn. It was a bundle of money, enough to buy himself 120 sheep, a return ticket, and a license to import products from Africa into his own country. He waited patiently for the merchant to awaken and open shop. Then the 2 went off to have some more tea. "I'm leaving today," the boy said. "I have the money I need to buy my sheep, and you have the money you need to go to Mecca." The old man said nothing. "Will you give me your blessing?" the boy asked. "You have helped me." The man continued to prepare his tea, saying nothing. Then he turned to the boy. "I am proud of you," he said. "You brought a new feeling into my crystal shop, but you know that I am not going to go to Mecca, just as you know that you're not going to buy your sheep." "Who told you that?" the boy startled. "Maktub," the old crystal merchant said, and he gave the boy his blessing.